Throughout history, humanity has been great at finding new ways to torture our fellow humans. Even so, this might be one of the worst ways we've discovered so far. This brutal punishment can be traced back to the Papal States, a series of territories in the Italian peninsula that were under the direct rule of the Pope from 756 to 1870 CE. At their height, the Papal States included the Italian regions of Lazio, including the city of Rome, Marca, Umbria, and Romagna. Most executions in the Papal States were done by hangings, classic beheadings, or in the cases that seemed to warrant a bit more pageantry, burning at the stake. However, in cases considered especially heinous, a prisoner might be executed by drawing and quartering or a bludgeoning in the form of the mazzatello. The mazzatello, or mazzallatura, was a method of capital punishment named after the tool used to perform it, a large, long-handled mallet. Jeffrey Abbott, author of What a Way to Go! The Guillotine, the Pendulum, the Thousand Cuts, the Spanish Donkey, and 66 other ways of putting someone to death, described mazzatello as one of the most brutal methods of execution ever devised, requiring minimal skill on the part of the executioner and superhuman acquiescence by the victim. But enough about how terrible it was. What exactly made the mazzatello so brutal? If someone was found guilty of a crime terrible enough to earn a sentence of death by mazzatello, they would be led to a scaffold in the Roman public square. Accompanying them were a priest who would hear the confession, as well as an executioner dressed in black and wearing a mask. The priest would say a prayer for the condemned criminal's soul, and then the mazzatello mallet would be raised, swung heavily through the air, and brought down hard on the prisoner's head. If the blow to the head didn't kill them right away, then the executioner would slit the condemned's throat for good measure. So, what sorts of crimes were considered vile enough to warrant execution by mazzatello? One of the most notable cases that ended in public execution by mazzatello occurred in 1565, when a man named Benedetto Accolti hatched a plan to murder Pope Pius IV. Accolti, the son of a cardinal, convinced 3 of his friends to conspire with him and carry out the act. The exact motivations for this planned murder were a little bit murky, though some historians suggested it was the result of a group of Catholics who considered Pius to be a heretic. Whatever the reason might have been, Accolti and his co-conspirators planned to kill the Pope at an audience with the man in December of 1594, but backed out at the last minute. Before they could plan another attempt on his life, Cavaliere Polliccione snitched on his friends, exposing the assassination plot in exchange for a pardon. While he got off relatively scot-free, the other 3 men were sentenced to death. On January 27, 1565, Benedetto Accolti, Antonio Canossa, and Taddeo Manfredi were dragged into the capital and beaten to death via mazzatello, or as it was more formally called at the time, mazzallatura. You didn't have to plan to assassinate the Pope in order to find yourself on the business end of the mazzatello mallet, however. Sometimes a bit of good old-fashioned patricide was more than enough. In September of 1598, the Cenci family teamed up to kill their patriarch, Count Francisco Cenci. First, his daughter Beatrice and her stepdaughter, Lucrezia, slipped him some sort of drug or tincture to knock him out. Beatrice and Lucrezia had help from Beatrice's brother, Giacomo, as well as 2 vassals named Marzio and Olimpio. Olimpio also happened to be Beatrice's secret lover. The drug effect didn't last through the night, and the men had to hold the count down while they killed him with a hammer and an iron spike through the head. They then dressed his body in fresh clothes and threw him over an edge of the balcony to make it look like he'd fallen to his death. They even broke a part of the balcony to add to the illusion. They removed the bloody bedsheets and then fled the scene. Unfortunately for the rest of the Cenci family as well as their 2 helpers, authorities quickly discerned that Count Cenci's death had not been an accident. Marzio made a break for it, fleeing for the mountains, where he was eventually tracked down and killed by a relative of Count Cenci. The rest of them, Beatrice, Lucrezia, Giacomo, and Olimpio, as well as 12-year-old Bernardo Cenci, were arrested for the crime and thrown in jail. In spite of the brutal nature of the crime, most of the Roman people were on the side of the accused. Count Cenci had been a famously violent, abusive man, particularly toward his wife and daughter. People understood why they might want to be rid of him for good. However, Pope Clement saw patricide as a particularly horrible crime and decided that any leniency shown in this case might encourage other children to murder their parents, and so he ordered the accused to be tortured. Olimpio refused to crack, keeping quiet about the details of the conspiracy until he died from his injuries. Giacomo, however, did not stay quiet. He named Beatrice as the primary driving force behind the murder. Beatrice, Lucrezia, Giacomo, and Bernardo were found guilty and sentenced to death. Bernardo was eventually pardoned, but the rest of his family were not so lucky. Lucrezia and Beatrice were beheaded with an axe, but Giacomo was selected for the most brutal death, First, he was tortured in a cart on his way to the scaffold. Next, his head was caved in with the Mazzatello mallet. And then finally, his corpse was drawn and quartered. Legends say the ghost of Beatrice Cenci returns to haunt the bridge where she was executed, carrying her severed head in her arms. The legends don't happen to mention if Giacomo joins her, lamenting his own terrible death. The most famous individual by far to use the Mazzatello method of execution was a man named Giovanni Battista Bugatti, better known by his nickname Mastro Tita, or Master of Justice. From 1796 to 1864, he served as the official executioner for the Vatican and Papal States. During his tenure, he personally performed an eye-popping 516 executions. Don't worry, he didn't actually pop any eyes, as far as we know, but he still shed plenty of blood. Bugatti took his first life on March 22, 1796, at the age of only 17 years old. The condemned man was named Nicola Gentilucci, convicted of strangling and killing a priest, killing a coachman, and robbing 2 friars. No contemporary sources are certain about how he first fell into the line of work or why he was trusted with such a solemn duty at such a young age, but we do know that his first execution marked the beginning of his long career as an executioner for the Papal States. Giovanni Battista Bugatti was a burly man who worked a second job between executions, operating a shop next to his home in Borgo Sant'Angelo, where he sold painted umbrellas and souvenirs. It was a surprisingly cheerful day job for an executioner, but his neighbors became accustomed to seeing him leave his home in his official uniform whenever there was capital punishment to dole out. For the sake of his own safety, given the nature of his work, Bugatti was not permitted to enter the central districts of the city unless he was there on morbid official business. So when the people of Rome saw Bugatti, or Mastro Tita as he became known, crossing the bridge in his scarlet executioner's cloak, they knew someone was going to lose their life that day. Bugatti carried out his executions using a variety of methods. Hanging was a popular method at the time, as well as beheading with an axe. And then of course he used the Mazzatello, smashing the condemned over the head with a mallet before slitting their throat to ensure that they were well and truly dead. It should be noted that though his work was gruesome, Bugatti was not known to take any pleasure in it. He was solemn and serious about his deadly duty, doing only what was required of him and no more, no less. One particular habit was his tendency to occasionally offer the condemned a pinch of snuff, finely ground tobacco leaves, inhaled through the nose, as a last comfort before their lives were snuffed out for good. But don't let this small gesture make you think that Bugatti's work was anything less than gruesome and harrowing to watch. In 1846, Charles Dickens himself wrote a travel journal about his time exploring Italy and France with his family. In Pictures from Italy, he described the experience of witnessing an execution by guillotine, performed by none other than Bugatti himself. Dickens, accompanied by 2 of his friends, traveled to the place of execution near the church of San Giovanni Decollato. There he saw the scaffold, the prisoner, and Bugatti in his scarlet cloak. The condemned man was forced to kneel, and his head was placed into position, his neck in the path of the guillotine's blade. Then the plank descended and the man's head was sliced clean off his neck. Bugatti then grabbed the decapitated head by the hair, lifted it into the air, and showed it to the crowd. Dickens described the experience as an ugly, filthy, careless, sickening spectacle. He also recounted the immediate aftermath of the execution, saying, "The body was carted away in due time, the knife cleansed, the scaffold taken down, and all the hideous apparatus removed. The executioner, an outlaw ex officio, what a satire on the punishment, who dare not for his life cross the bridge of Sant'Angelo but to do his work, retreated to his lair, and the show was over." This was the guillotine, regarded as one of the more humane methods of execution available at the time. Imagine if he had witnessed an execution by a Mazzatello, an act which would, for a person living at the time, evoke the image of cattle being slaughtered in a similar manner. Dickens was not the only famous author to catch a glimpse of Bugatti at work. The poet Lord Byron also saw him in action in 1817, when he performed 3 beheadings at Piazza del Popolo. Lord Byron was impressed with what he saw, writing a letter to his editor John Murray, in which he said, "The quick rattle and heavy fall of the axe, the splash of blood, and the ghastliness of the exposed heads is altogether more impressive than the vulgar and dirty new drop and dog-like agony of infliction upon the sufferers of the English sentence." The English sentence he referred to here was hanging. He continued to describe his experience with the Italian method of execution. The pain seems little, and yet the effect to the spectator and the preparation to the criminal is very striking and chilling. The first turned me quite hot and thirsty, and made me shake so that I could hardly hold the opera glass. I was close, but was determined to see, as one should see everything once, with attention. The second and third, which shows how dreadfully soon things grow indifferent, I am ashamed to say had no effect on me. as a horror, though I would have saved them if I could. Bugatti retired from his position at the ripe old age of 85 and lived another 5 years after that. During his retirement, he received a pension from the state in honor of his very long-lasting duties. He died in 1864. But the stories of his work lived much, much longer. In 1891, an editor got hold of Bugatti's meticulously kept diary, in which he cataloged the details of every execution that he performed during his 68-year career, including the method of execution, the name of the condemned, and the crime they had committed. An anonymous author published an anthology of stories inspired by this diary, entitled Memoirs of an Executioner, written by himself. The original diary includes a mention of Bugatti's first execution by Mazzatello. On March 28, 1797, I beat with a mallet and ripped Valentano Marco Rossi, who killed his uncle and cousin, to take revenge for the unequal division made of a common inheritance. The accounts we've presented in this video and more guarantee the Mazzatello a place in history's worst execution methods. Now watch, what does it actually feel like to be shot? Or watch this video instead.